Peggy 12.
Can you tell me a little about your game studio?
It's right now, it's 10 years ago already. So my brother and I were just sitting at our kitchen table at our former house of my dad, and we were thinking what if we literally looking up to the Dutch studios out there, could we just do what they were doing, or that was more of the idea. And we just took a whiteboard from our sister's room, and I remember this, we started just making up that we were doing a game studio or making a game. So that's how Koen started in the first place. We started with zero, so we had nothing, no money, nothing. And we started to be smart with maybe selling a website here and there, making sure that we had enough money to rent an office for 3 months. And then we started to hire some interns or one programmer that I was in school with. And that's how the whole studio started from the early beginnings. And after we figured out in that first year or what type of game developer we are, we started to look into, for example, the engines part, and we weren't happy with how things turned out. So eventually we found Unreal Engine 4. We talked to our programmer and said hey, is this something serious? And we went into it and we pitched inside the company back then a new game concept called Moon Man, and that eventually turned out to be Deliver Us the Moon. That was okay, this seems to be something we can debut with. And the whole sci-fi aspect to it probably came down from back in the day with our grandpa, because our grandpa is a telescope maker. So we saw the moon up close when we were super young. So I remember he had this a large telescope, and there was a special occasion where he put it up. Together with a moment where he showed me the Halley comet coming by in the evening sky at 2 a.m. And then you have to understand, I'm just 8 years old, I think. And that is where Paul and I just couldn't resist also making a sci-fi game. Paul and I are always in the early beginnings of our life made movies. We made Star Wars movies. We made James Bond movies. Just trying to make entertainment in a way and having a lot of fun with it. And it seems that we never stopped doing that as brothers.
But was it always intended to be a trilogy?
So what we saw is that there were a lot of, let's say an indie game or any game developer really had a one-off. And when we saw what the landscape was doing, it is already hard to establish an IP. So from the beginning, we already had the intent to build upon this series in either more titles, more versions, more sequels. Eventually, the idea for 3 games at the very least was very early on. There is some sort of a drive forward in our games, and even though a small indie title that we, or a small developer that we were, creating Deliver Us the Moon, that's around, I think, 4 to 5 hours, 5 to 6, felt like it was just beginning in some way. It is always our ambition to kind of grow towards that more grand scale, grandiose game. Now, at the beginning, we didn't even know we would do voice acting, for example. But at some point during our developments, especially when we signed a deal with a publisher in Sweden, by the way, it was Starbreeze, we knew that the stakes rose into the expectancy of the game, and in a way we thought, hey, this is actually the time that we now need voice actors and trying to express the narrative a lot deeper. Most people know what happened to Starbreeze back in the day. Starbreeze really had their own issues going on, so we had to get out of the whole structure there. We eventually got the publishing rights back, and we eventually went with Wired Productions in the UK. With Deliver Us Mars, we had Frontier, a bigger developer there, and also a publisher back in the day. As much as actually it is super cool that we've done motion capture, face animation, and a lot of other bells and whistles that started to look like, what the AAA was doing as well. It also brought its caveats. So it's super hard to kind of manage that type of ambition. And that's something it's sort of a blessing, but also it's a little bit of both, because you are adding so much complexity to the game. I have to say I'm super happy with the result. I think Deliver Us Mars really shows what the ambition of our studio at heart is.
What can we expect from Deliver Us Home now?
What's important to understand is that, so we were very much hurt in our ambition for Deliver Us Mars, and when 2023 and 24 hit, you can see that the landscape in development really changed. The ease of getting a deal or making sure that you can exist as a studio was becoming more slim after time. And we were super prepared because we were already trained to some extent with how Starbreeze also, was a hard patch in our trajectory of the studio. So we were super prepared when we released Deliver Us Mars, and we told the team that we were super transparent about what potentially could be the case. So in the worst case, we had to say goodbye to all of the team and then figure out another way if we can continue the studio or the game series. So we had 2.5 years before actually releasing Deliver Us Mars. We already knew we needed to work on that connection at the end. So sadly, at April this year, we just had to say goodbye to the entire studio. It brought us a couple of things. First of all, we pitched over 200 times to I think 50 plus publishers. And what happens is then, in some way, I think listening too much or trying to adapt to a sort of request by a publisher, if it's scope funding or whatever it is, sometimes we were too high, sometimes we were too low. It didn't really help us, but also not them. So eventually it didn't work out. So what happened is that's where we were more of the question, so what do we do now? And what we saw is that the community absolutely wanted Deliver Us Home to be out there. Paul and I are now on our own, and still we thought we still need to make this game because we want to make it and we can see that the community wants it. So we thought, let's prove it again, like we did with Deliver Us the Moon. Go back to Kickstarter and try to see if it's true, if people actually want this game to happen. And luckily, we can now say that a lot of people do. So we have a successful Kickstarter. So what the cool thing about it is, going back to the game, and we have two super nice core KOCAM people that volunteered to help us setting up this campaign and the demo. Because you're kind of limited so hard in your resources. So think about Deliver Us the Moon at peak was made by a core team of around 10 people, maybe raising up to 15, 20 sometimes. Deliver Us Mars was made with a core team of 20 people, raising up to 45 at peak. Now we were 2 of the founders and 2 volunteers. And now we had to set up in a month a campaign, a demo, and a trailer and make sure that that's successful. You go back to the roots of your series. So you look at what was the strength of Deliver Us the Moon and what can we learn from Deliver Us Mars or use that elevates the series to a valuable, worthy successor in that sense. And what we saw is there's one wish we always had is that we want more wide linearity. We want to open up the world in a way that made Deliver Us the Moon quite interesting. As much as it's still very linear, Moon had this, let's say Moon is less on rails than Mars. And I think what we try here is that where Mars did great stuff with a system of how we puzzled through some areas, where one-off in Deliver Us the Moon was very surprising, we really like to take that element back into Deliver Us Home, where every time you encounter something that progresses you throughout the world, the game, and the story, it should be surprising in a way to you. It should be something that you haven't thought of before when playing the game. And that's something very strong that we want to add to Deliver Us Home, together with control over agency over your character. And we saw that as much as we really love Kathy in Deliver Us Mars, we also saw the benefit of what if we can actually tamper or work on your suit? What if we can have customization in some way that benefits your story, maybe benefits your moving forward, opening up areas and really benefiting the exploration. And that's really what we're focusing on with Deliver Us Home, while we also have invested heavily, of course, into our Deliver Us suite right now that we have with the puzzle elements, with the climbing mechanic you just said. And we all want to make cleverly use and creative use out of like combining those elements, crafting a perfect down the middle road on what Deliver Us the Moon and Mars make great. So what the readers can do is they can, of course, if they read this in time, there's still possible to pledge for a couple of tiers. I think that just runs until we stop it, or it runs either with a month in between nothing happening, then it's automatically out. But we're not really sure yet on how long we can keep this track. But what we did see is the Deliver Us series, like Moon and Mars, both have a tendency to be a more sleeper hit. So over time, it brings in a lot of fans and people. So the whole late pledging part was very logical, as some people right now discover that it was on Kickstarter and then they feel sort of left out, like, oh, I would have backed this. Second is always wishlist the game on Steam, because it just it helps a lot in speaking to whatever area we move to, even if it's another partner or something. It just shows like, okay, there's a very much ask for this game as well. So that helps. Keeping our socials in check, because we're trying to be more open about our development. So we're going to share a lot more of our ideas for Deliver Us Home. We also see a huge value in the community, because the community brought a lot of cool things to our development process. So that's what we really want to engage with again.
I love that you're still struggling on, and you have the Kickstarter was successful and everything. So if there's something you want to end this with, like something from you just want to tell the readers or me or Senses or...
It is an extremely rough patch, and as much as I hate to say that we have experienced super low depths in our 10 years of existence of the studio, still the fight to make games, like the real reason we are doing this, kept alive. So it felt more like if we would say no to giving it a fighting chance, even though if it meant losing the entire studio almost, it felt like you kind of say no to the thing you really love the most. And that's something too hard to do. So, and that's maybe also what you see in the industry. I think it's time that, let's say, the focus on numbers and the focus on can the game make this amount of money, it should be, we need to respect as developers, but also as publishers, everyone that's working in this business need to respect the medium for what it is. And right now, that kept us fighting, because we really love to make these games, and that's what we're gonna do. What I see in the future is the focus is now Deliver Us Home. We did it with Deliver Us the Moon, debuting, so we weren't even known back then. So the network we have now is huge. So there's an absolutely serious, realistic chance that we get this game out there, even if it means Paul and I working over hours getting this game out, because that's what we like to do. If that happens, and then the surprises we have in the game, it's very cool to see that we actually are forced to step back down, because it helps make the game come to its core in a way. And the series will do the series justice. That's the good thing. I think we're not giving up on getting this game out there and making this series complete to a certain extent, because there's a lot of unanswered questions still in both of these games. And we want to surprise the player with it. So as much as people think maybe it goes this way, it probably is going something different, but it should surprise everyone again.
Great, I'm so happy we could do this. It's really nice talking to you, and I can keep on and on indefinitely.
Likewise, Ron.